This is the Fender that I'm working with today, and believe it or not, this is actually the better of the two Fenders that I have, and by quite a bit actually, but it still has a few issues. First and foremost are these holes that run along the rear. Both the area near the bend and the lip on the other side are rusted away pretty well to nothingness. There's also a patch here that someone must have done at some point, which is also starting to give way to rust, which makes sense because the truck is sat since the 80s, so these patch panels are at best 30 years old. This is the front lip of the Fender where it connects to the grille. You can see that it's in rough shape too. There are a few holes that need to be filled and also a huge patch panel that someone brazed on, which is starting to delaminate. Now, these lips hold a lot of weight, so even if you can't see them in the finished truck, it's important that we make them strong again. This seems like an appropriate time to remind you that I am a very novice welder. This is one of my first times MIG welding with gas, so I decided to weld together this little box first and see if the welds would hold my weight. It did, so I felt okay about moving on to the Fender. This is the first hole that I'm going to patch. It's actually a hole that I made myself with the grinder by mistake when I was taking the Fender off the truck. We're just going to measure it first so I know roughly how big to make my patch piece. This is just a sheet of 20 gauge sheet metal that I have that I plan to cut my patch out of. The exact dimensions of the patch aren't super important at this point, as I can just cut the panel to match the patch. I don't have a sheet metal cutter, so just a grinder it is for me. Honestly, for the amount of sheet metal work that I'll ever do, a grinder is just fine. We'll just give this a quick spray down. It's been sitting around in my garage for a few months, so it's gotten pretty dirty. We'll get this patch lined up on the lip. I think it's about the right size as it is. Then we're going to clamp them down. And now comes the part I fear the most, which is having YouTube watch some of my first ever gas welds. I'm just going to make a few tacks here just to hold it up for the next step. Now I'm going to cut along one side of my piece. This is something that I saw at Fitzy's Fabrication, who's a Newfoundlander on YouTube that shows some great body tips for beginners like me. It's a wonderful channel, and if I can think to remember it when I'm done, I'll link him down below. Anyways, it turns out that the gap that the zip wheel left was a bit too much for me to weld over comfortably yet. I'm just not experienced enough to fill a gap very well. So this is the only side of the piece that I'm going to try that one on. Because this lip sits between the bumper and the fender, there's no way that it'll ever be seen. Therefore, I'm not worried about welding it flush like I am with the rest of the fender. I'll just weld it on top of the old metal. On the left, I've already finished welding the first side over the gap, and now I'm just going to weld it the rest of the way around. I'm trying a variety of different shapes here as I weld, but I was most happy with just the simple oval tack welds. I found them to be the most predictable, and they had the least holes when I ground them back. Now, that's not to say that they're actually the best overall, just the best for my skill level, which is none. You know the saying, a grinder and paint makes me the welder I ain't? Well, I'm leaning on that one pretty hard through this project, so here's the grinder portion. There are definitely a few holes that pop up after grinding, but they're mostly on the side with the gap I had to fill. The other two sides had fewer and smaller holes. I patched those up a little off camera, and that pretty much ends the whole patch piece. Now on to the next one. Here is a little bit of a closer view of the next area I need to work on. It's way worse than the first. The lip is rotten the whole way around, even missing in some spots, and the metal is weak a few inches back in some areas. I think I'm going to have to do this one in a few pieces. You can see that there are a few layers of metal here, and that's because of that patch panel that someone in the past brazed on. Looking inside, we can see that it was quite a large panel, but that they left all the original Fender metal on top of it still. So I'll just cut that off and see what we have to work with. So in looking at the side of this Fender and the condition that it's in, I think I'm probably going to replace quite a bit of this whole strip here. And we're going to start with up top. So my thought is I'm going to cut a piece about this wide, and then I'm going to put this lip on in here. Because this lip, which is here, should be all the way down, but it's not. So I'm going to cut this lip on them, and then I'm going to try and shape them all the way down to about there or so. And we'll make them, you can see there's a little hole there, so we'll probably have it come out about that far and come all the way down, and then lip over. And then for the bottom, we'll do the same thing, come out to about here, come down, and over. And then this also will have to have a lip added to it. Now there is actually quite a strong lip already here. You can see this is delaminated. Because on the inside, you can see the mark where somebody has actually brazed some metal on there, and that's held up really well. But I'm probably still going to add that lip on. But you know, from this point, or this point here up, quite a bit more crucial. So the first thing I'll do will be to measure the approximate length of my cut, just using this piece of rope. Call it right about there. I had this one marked out the same as I did the first one. I made it about 1 inch longer on one side, and that's what I plan on using to make the lip with. Now that I've completed it though, I can say that I had wished I had left more material to use to make the lip, maybe closer to 2 inches instead. The marked line is just a rough guide for where the lip will go. I'm not too sure what happened to the video quality here. I guess maybe my camera just doesn't like the fluorescent lights that are in my wood workshop. I'm only here for a few shots though. So my basic plan for bending the lip, since I don't actually have any sheet metal tools, is just to clamp the metal in a vise and then beat it flat. The metal tried to fight me a little here. It doesn't like that not all of it is being bent at the same time, but the end result was a pretty consistent and even bend, so I'm happy with it. So I figure I have the patch panel about the size I want it. Now I just have to put the bend in it. I'll mock it up a little here, and then I'm just taking guesses at where I need to make the relief cuts for the metal. There's probably a formula for this, but I'm just using my eyeballs. before I can put the new patch in, I have to get rid of some of the old lip, so out comes the grinder again. Apparently I didn't have the camera on when I bent the new patch, but it worked really well. The relief cuts did their job nicely. Now, unlike the other patch that we did, this one actually needs to sit flush and in line with the fender because it will be visible in the finished product. So I'll trace around the patch to get its outline, and then we'll take the grinder to the fender and cut it out. Now that it's cut out, you can see sort of like a cross-section of the previous repairs done to the fender. I count at least 3 sheets layered on top of one another near the top of the patch. I'm not sure what happened to the footage of the panel going in, and it's actually the second bit of footage that I've lost, but it's all tacked up now and I'm pretty happy with the way it fits. I'm getting better at making those small spot welds without burning through the metal. The only spot I'm not happy with is the end here where one of my welds let go and it pulled away a little. I'm pretty sure I can fill that gap with weld though. Like I said earlier, I'm not very good at filling gaps with weld yet, but these tacks went well enough. I should be able to start filling the rest of the welds in now without fear of that guy pulling away on me. Honestly, these welds aren't that bad for me. There were a few spots I burned through a little, but my welder is on as low as it'll go, so that's just on me at this point. It's time to grind them back a little bit and see how I did. After grinding, I can see that there are only a few little spots I need to fill. I mean, little by my standards anyways, but otherwise it's fine. I learned something pretty valuable here when filling these holes from earlier. When grinding back thin sheet metal like this, make sure you don't grind them totally flush until you know for sure that you don't have to add any more material. I took a bit too much off when welding in some places, and that came back to bite me. I had a hard time filling in those holes I created because the sheet metal underneath was thinner after my grinding, but I made it work. So that's one of the 3 panels done on this side of the fender. The next one is going to replace this rotten chunk here, and the last one will mostly just do the lip. I'll speed the process up for those though, since it's the same thing we just went through for the first 2. First we get our measurements. I'm going to say it's about 3 inches one way and maybe 4 the other. Then we mark it on our sheet metal. Then we give it a cut. This is just a simple square, so it doesn't take too long. because this bend is smaller than the jaws of my vise, it makes bending it over way easier than the last one I did. I'll quickly outline this piece the same as I did the last one, and then I'll cut them out. When I'm cutting them though, I'm going to be careful not to cut into the patch that's beneath it, because I plan on leaving that one there just for that little bit of extra strength. I feel like I got pretty lucky with this one. The patch fits into place nearly perfectly. I had to move the camera a little to keep my head out of the shot for this one. By this point, I'm becoming more confident in my welds. They're more consistently the same size, and there are less holes. I do notice though, for some reason, I seem to be holding the tip right up against the metal, and I'm holding it at strange angles too. It's funny the things you don't notice in real life until you see them play back to you on video. It kills me to do this, but now I have to cut in where my first and second panel meet. I've been dreading this since I started the second panel, because although it's hard to see on the camera, there's already some damage here, which means that the original Fender didn't line up the way it was supposed to, so neither are my patch panels without a little fancy pressure. And maybe some body filler down the road. That body line on the left there pretty well ends where my patch panel begins, but I'll have to do a little bit of filler work to get it looking just right again. For now, I just have to try and fill another wide, or at least wide for me anyways, gap with some weld. If nothing else, at least I'm getting some practice out of it. Now it's time to grind it back again. I actually really enjoy the grinding process. It makes the welds look a lot nicer, and having everything flush just makes it a lot easier to envision the finished panel. And this is our finished patch. You may notice that the welds haven't been ground back quite flush yet, and that's just because I learned from my mistake earlier and left a little more meat on the bones in case I need to go back and weld some more later on. With that patch finished, that's the last of the metal work I think I'll show. There was a bit more here and there, but I think you get the point. I still have a bit of filler work to do as well, but by now the Fender is actually almost ready for paint. I was pretty worried cutting into this Fender because in over 8 months of searching, I still haven't been able to find a single replacement, new or used, available up my way in Canada, so it was a big risk. Worth it though. And if you have any advice on metalwork, welding, or old internationals, by all means let me know in the comments down below. And if you would like to see me fumble my way through the rest of this project, you can subscribe for new videos or check my channel for previous ones. Thanks for watching.